I find it funny when people suggest that the best thing a time traveler could do to fix our timeline would be to go back and kill Hitler before he could enact his policies. It's ignorant on many levels. Now, I like to take of one of these comedians, I forget which one, he had as his idea was bribing Hitler's art professor so that he would pass him in art school rather than kill him in his crib solution that's more wildly popular with leftists. Well, when your only tool's a hammer, huh? Now, the first and most obvious problem is Adolf isn't history's biggest mass murderer. Its absolute best. Killing Hitler merely lowers the 20th century's body count by around 11%. Second, it assumes the entire Nazi movement was created by Adolf. National Socialism was a mature philosophy by the time Mr. Hitler stumbled upon it, which caused him to leave the German Communist Party. Other personalities could have easily stepped in rather than him. Following the National Socialist blueprint, they would have arrived at similar conclusions. Worse, it's even possible that somebody who was a more effective at military ops might have taken over, making Germany more successful, or someone who is far more adept at being destructive to civilian populations could have ended up in the role as well. So, in other words, to rid the world of Nazis, you need to rid the world of its philosophical foundations. So, how would you do that? Well, you'd kill this guy, kill him before he writes or says anything about Marxism. Now, like Adolf, there's no need to perform infanticide on him. Just arrange to get a cheap case of whiskey delivered daily to his house, and old Carl would probably take himself out in a matter of months. Unlike Adolf, who just put together what others had already put together for him, Marx created a unique, albeit unfunctional, synthesis of ideas that had not come together before. Some of the ideas were unique contributions. It's reasonable to assume that if Marx doesn't do it, no one does. I mean, if Marx were just some simpleton, well, then anyone could come up with this. But being the leftist genius of all ages, as he clearly was, if he doesn't do it, well, clearly no one can. So with no Marx, then there's no overt joining of anarchism to socialism. And the many subdivisions of both philosophies will likely remain and possibly even multiply. The 1840s revolution now has no communist rally point for the people to get their hopes up and then have them dashed. The 1840s revolutions had communist participation, but was by no means the driving force. So these 1840s revolutions will likely happen as they did before, with similar outcomes. However, I think there's a coin toss here whether the social democrat movement actually occurs. In fact, I think it's a really good chance it doesn't happen at all and ends up being replaced by a milder labor reform movement that is fully captured by the establishments of the various countries. Socialists and anarchists will likely stick mostly to theory and small scale utopian experiments. With less emphasis on the revolution, there will be likely fewer violent anarchists. Now, World War I will still happen pretty much by the numbers. All the contributing factors remain, nothing really that would accelerate or slow down this momentum. However, when we get towards the end of the war, then we do get some changes. Russian Revolution of 1917 likely goes in a very different way. Lenin has no unique core philosophy to draw from, to form a vanguard party concept around, and in likelihood remains a minor figure. The Russian Civil War will emerge differently. There will be a very strong socialist revolutionary movement as before, and that's the Socialist Revolutionary Party, as well as the anarchist populist movement. The Russian Socialist Revolution Party was much more focused on agricultural socialism and federalism. The anarchists had very similar goals, but wanted a lot less structure than the Socialist Revolution Party. So, why do I think these forces will basically create social revolution in the rural areas? Well, because if you look at Ukraine, while the Russian Civil War was going on, Ukraine was pretty much left on its own. And with the social currents in effect there, the absence of authority, Ukraine briefly formed anarchist governments and lasted about 8 months and kept going right up until the Bolshevik Russians invaded. I suspect the bulk of rural and small towns in Russia will likely form mutualist, voluntarist, and socialist communes and other anarchist systems. The White Russians will probably carve out urban areas and enough farmland to support these areas, but because of their numbers, won't push too far beyond their means. This assumes that the rural socialists and the anarchist enclaves are content with their gains and won't push back against the White Russians or each other, because there's just enough difference between the two that they did fight each other and ally with each other and fight each other in reality, depending on the way things were going. So Russia will drift into a de facto federated system that will eventually become the basis of a new constitutional federation. Now, this will probably be preceded by a slow boiling civil war of much lower intensity than the original Russian Civil War. Assuming that economic stability eventually comes from this, the numbers of people who die in the Russian Civil War are going to be greatly reduced. World War I would end up more or less on schedule. Russia might stay in the war a little longer, delaying Germany from being able to pivot west. That might stall or delay the German final offensive, and this may alter the endpoint of the lines and casualties. However, economic reality will cause Germany to exit the war more or less on schedule. Post war talks will most likely go pretty much the same. So, in the aftermath of World War I, Italy is still going to face post war instability. However, rather than Russian inspired, foreign funded Bolsheviks, the threat will be anarchy syndicalist in nature. Mussolini and his fascists will still rise to power via syndicalism as a counter to take the mechanisms of anarchy under their control. If the syndicates work for the anarchists and the fascists take them away, no reason to believe they can't make them work the way they had ended up doing historically. Now, Germany will be starkly different, though. A lack of communism changes the nature of their internal upheavals. There is less cohesion and an unclear message in the fighting. Yes, the Free Corps will still be out and doing battle in the streets, but not against a clear foe, not against Spartakists or Bolsheviks or Reds. Now, in this timeline, Adolf will probably end up remaining in some kind of proto communist, proto socialist group and ends up barely becoming a footnote in history. There's nothing that would grab him from the outside of wherever he started. There's no Jewish inspired communism to rail against. The Marxian prescription of class struggle as the engine of history doesn't exist. Socialists, without Marx, are probably still going to be trying to use the morality of classism as their tool. National Socialist race theory and race conflict are deliberate fixes by the National Socialists to fix what they see as Marxian failures. National Socialism has no structure to build on without Marx. So, two major subcurrents that merged into the original National Socialism will still exist. One will be the Volksmythos, and the other will be a general hatred of the Weimar Republic by the establishment and most of the people. What this will end up doing in this timeline will likely manifest as a soft military takeover, placing the crown prince as the constitutional monarch. The German military has been conditioned not to want to rule the country. They want a strong man. This government will most likely follow in the footsteps of Bismarck, taking on soft style social reform programs in order to smooth over any friction in the population. In reality, the German military planned, with the blessing of the establishment, to put the crown prince back on the throne. The rise of National Socialism changed that outcome because Hitler basically took that place instead. No National Socialism, no Hitler. Crown Prince now sits on the throne. Now, this monarchist German government will be a lot less likely to press for the appeasement program the National Socialists embarked on. The biggest wild card now becomes uh, what is going on in Russia and what is Britain's perception of the continental balance. Now, if Russia achieves a functioning federal state, they could be perceived as a threat to the balance of power. Instead of fear of the red flag, fear of the black flag. Britain may opt to bestow most of the interwar appeasements that they originally gave to Hitler. However, the monarchist German government will be far more cautious and will be less likely to trip over red lines like creating conditions to dissolve Slovakia that ends up causing Britain to come back to war with them. If Russia is heavily fragmented and the SR and the anarchist contagion are not spreading, Britain will resume its old power game of keeping the balance of power on the continent and allying against anyone who looks like they're going to become a continental power. Britain may condone soft German expansion exactly as they did with Adolf, but the Germans will avoid triggering a war while doing it. World War II, as it happened, probably won't. German concentration camps and Russian gulags, as they happened, won't. National Socialist Germany felt compelled to expand east due to a collapsing economy and their socialist beliefs in the shrinking market fallacy. Imperial Germany will be more economically stable, and they likely won't be thinking of far off places like the Ukraine and the Caucasus. The next European war is far more likely to occur on the Russian frontier between Russia and its neighbors. The future wars in the Pacific may very well occur, but they may or may not involve the United States. And it's no sure thing that a universal Pacific European war occurs at the same time. This timeline would definitely bring the development of nuclear bombs much further into the future. A lack of a world war and a concentration of scientists in one place actually might cause them never to be built. At the very least, it might never be beta tested on a city full of people. Take Marx out of history, and millions live. So, why does Hitler become the time traveler's go to target? Well, deep down, the academics of the West need Hitler as a boogeyman to draw attention away from Marx and his philosophy, the philosophy they actually pine away for. All right, in the comments section below, were you aware of Marx's contribution to National Socialism? In my little thought exercise, where do you think I went right? Where do you think I went wrong? Please smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithms brought you here and you're not a regular subscriber, check out my other titles. You'll find a lot of things you like. It's worth subscribing to. And if you know someone who might find this interesting, share it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.